Your dog has been sitting at the window for 2 hours. You left this morning, same as every morning, and somewhere between the sound of the door closing and the moment you come back, it waits, just waits. And if you asked most people what's happening inside the dog during those hours, they'd say something like, nothing much. It doesn't really understand time. It's fine. Animals don't experience absence the way we do. But here's the question nobody actually wants to sit with. What if they're wrong? What if that dog, sitting at that window, isn't just waiting? What if it's experiencing something that has a name? And what if that name is loneliness? Before we get to animals, we need to get something straight about loneliness itself, because most people think loneliness means being alone. It doesn't. You can be alone and not lonely. You can be in a room full of people and be completely, devastatingly lonely. Loneliness isn't a situation. It's a signal, a specific biological signal that your brain sends when it detects that something it needs is missing. That something is social connection, not company, not proximity. Connection, the kind that registers as safe, familiar, and yours. Neuroscientists have known for decades that social pain is processed in the same regions of the brain as physical pain. When you lose someone, when you're excluded, when you're isolated from the people you're bonded to, the brain doesn't process that as an emotional inconvenience. It processes it the same way it processes getting hurt. The anterior cingulate cortex, the same structure that lights up when you stub your toe, lights up when you feel socially disconnected. Loneliness, at the level of the brain, is not a feeling, it is an alarm. And here is what makes that matter for animals. That alarm system didn't originate in humans. It evolved in social species long before we existed. The anterior cingulate cortex is not a uniquely human structure. It is present and functional in every social mammal that has been studied. Dogs have it. Elephants have it. Primates have it. Wolves have it. The neural architecture that produces social pain in your brain exists in theirs, which means the alarm that goes off when connection is missing has been running in animal brains for tens of millions of years longer than it has been running in ours. The evidence from isolation research makes this harder to dismiss. In the 1960s, Harry Harlow conducted a series of experiments at the University of Wisconsin that changed how science thought about social deprivation in animals. Rhesus monkeys raised in isolation developed what researchers described as profound behavioral abnormalities. They stopped engaging with the world. They rocked. They self-harmed. They became, in every measurable way, disturbed. When reintroduced to social environments, they struggled to function. The damage from isolation was not temporary. In some cases it was permanent. The brain had been changed by the absence of connection in ways that persisted long after the isolation ended. More recent research has moved away from extreme deprivation studies and towards something more subtle and more relevant. What happens to social animals under ordinary conditions of isolation? In 2016, a team of researchers at the University of Chicago led by John Cacioppo, one of the world's leading loneliness researchers, showed that loneliness produces measurable changes in gene expression in social mammals. Specifically, it activates genes associated with inflammation and threat response while suppressing genes associated with immune function. The lonely brain is not just sad. It is physiologically different from the connected one. It is running a different biological program. And this response has been documented not just in humans but in social animals across multiple species. But here is where the science gets careful, and where the question gets harder. There is a difference between being alone and feeling lonely. Between the body registering the absence of connection and there being something it is like to register that absence. A smoke detector goes off when there is smoke. That does not mean the smoke detector feels afraid. So when we say that an isolated animal shows measurable stress responses, measurable changes in brain chemistry, measurable behavioral deterioration, are we saying it feels lonely? Or are we saying its alarm is going off with no one home to hear it? That distinction is real, and science cannot fully close it. But here is what the behavioral evidence does show, and it is difficult to explain away. Dogs that are left alone for extended periods don't just show stress markers in their biology. They show behaviors that map specifically onto the experience of missing something. Not generalized anxiety, not random distress. Directed behavior. They go to the door. They go to the window. They lie in the spot where their person usually sits. They carry objects that belong to their person. A 2015 study published in Applied Animal Behavior Science found that dogs left alone showed higher cortisol levels, increased vocalization, and specific orientation behaviors directed toward the last location their owner was seen. They were not just stressed, they were looking for someone. Elephants are harder to explain away. In elephant society, Social bonds are the architecture of survival. When a member of the herd is separated, the response from the remaining animals is immediate and sustained. Vocalization increases. Search behavior begins. In documented cases of captive elephants held in isolation, the behavioral changes are severe enough that elephant sanctuaries now consider solitary confinement a welfare crisis. Joyce Poole, one of the world's leading elephant researchers, has documented elephants in isolation producing what she describes as contact calls, vocalizations specifically used to locate missing herd members. 4 days after separation, they are not just unsettled, they are calling out for someone who isn't there. Crows present a different and equally unsettling picture. Crows form long-term pair bonds and maintain complex social networks. When a bonded partner dies or disappears, the surviving crow shows behavioral changes that researchers describe as consistent with grief and social withdrawal. They spend less time in areas associated with the missing bird. They engage less with their broader social group. They are, by every behavioral measure, affected by the absence. And crows, unlike dogs, were not domesticated. There was no thousands of years of coevolution with humans shaping their responses. Whatever is happening in a crow when its partner disappears is happening entirely on its own terms. There is a chimpanzee named Tommy who spent years alone in a cage in a shed in upstate New York, separated from other chimpanzees, surrounded by television sets left on for stimulation. When researchers from the Non-Human Rights Project documented his case in 2013, they described an animal that had effectively stopped engaging with the world. He sat, he stared, he rocked. The researchers who visited him described his eyes as the part they couldn't forget. Not frightened, not angry, just absent, as if whatever had been in there had retreated somewhere unreachable. A chimpanzee in a room full of noise and light, completely alone. 4 years. Whether Tommy felt lonely the way you feel lonely, whether there was a subjective experience of missing connection that resembled anything you would recognize, we cannot confirm. What we can say is that his brain had the architecture to process social pain, that his species forms bonds as complex as any in the animal kingdom, that isolation produced in him every behavioral and physiological marker associated with profound social deprivation, and that the researchers who looked into his eyes came away changed. So where does that leave the question? The science says that social animals have the neural hardware for loneliness. That isolation produces measurable biological and behavioral changes consistent with social pain. That the behaviors associated with separation, the searching, the calling, the withdrawal, appear across species that have never had contact with humans and cannot be explained by learned responses to human emotion. What the science cannot say is whether any of that involves an experience, whether there is something it is like to be Tommy in that shed, or the elephant calling into an empty field, or your dog lying in your spot waiting for you to come back. But consider this. The alarm that goes off when connection is missing has been preserved by evolution across hundreds of millions of years and dozens of species. Evolution does not preserve things that do nothing. That alarm exists because social connection is not optional for social animals. It is as necessary as food, as water, as safety, and the system that detects its absence is ancient, and shared, and running right now in every social animal on this planet. Your dog is still at the window. You've been gone 3 hours. The biology says something in there registered your absence the moment you left. Whether it has a name from the inside, whether it feels like anything, we still can't say with certainty. But the window it keeps watching isn't nothing, and the door it keeps waiting at isn't nothing either. Some part of whatever is in there knows that something is missing, and it is waiting for it to come back.